Hello everyone, my name is Vasianas and today I'll be presenting a topic that many of us interact with on a daily basis, which is coffee, but through a scientific evidence-based, a cellular biology perspective. Coffee is incredible woven into human behavior and culture. It's a morning ritual, a productivity booster, and for some people, almost an emotional support beverage. Globally, humans consume more than 2.25 billion cups of coffee every single day, which makes it one of the most widely consumed pharmacologically active substances. That scale alone makes coffee worth studying because even small effects on health can translate into enormous public health consequences. Historically, advice around coffee has been inconsistent. For decades, patients with heart disease were told to avoid it. The belief was the caffeine triggered arrhythmias, raised heart rate, or increased blood pressure. But as we often see in medicine, early assumptions don't always hold up once we get higher quality data. The study I am presenting today, based on the UK Biobank, involving nearly 450,000 adults, is one of the largest and most methodologically rigorous studies to ever examine coffee and cardiovascular health. So, what's make this study particular interesting is that it doesn't jump just lump all coffee drinkers together. It separates ground coffee, instant coffee, and decaf, and also stratifies results by the number of cups consumed. Throughout this presentation, I'm not just going to summarize what the study found. What I want to do is, especially because this is a graduate level assignment, is evaluate the research, how strong is the evidence, how well controlled is the study, how do the findings align with the biological mechanisms, what are the limitations of potential co-founders, and what does the research mean for real people making decisions about their health. By the end, my goal is to provide a deep, coherent narrative that connects epidemiological findings with physiological pathways and public health implications. So, why do we even study coffee? There are several compelling scientific reasons. First, coffee is biologically complex. Most people think of it purely as a caffeine, but in reality, coffee contains over 1000 different bioactive compounds, which includes polyphenol like chlorogenic acid, diterpenes such as kefsterone and kahval, magnesium and potassium, antioxidants, melanoidins formed during roastings. Many of these compounds have known effects on metabolism, inflammation, oxidative stress, and endothelial function, all of which play a major role in the cardiovascular health. Second, previous research has produced mixed results. Some studies suggested coffee increased heart palpitations or blood pressure. Others found protective associations. Many of these contradictions existed because earlier studies were small, relied heavily on self-reporting, or followed participants for a short period of time. Third, coffee consumption is a modified behavior. Unlike fixed risk factors such as genetics or age, dietary habits can be changed. If coffee truly influences arrhythmias, cardiovascular disease, or mortality, then understanding this relationship has significant implications for public health and clinical recommendations. And then finally, coffee is not a niche behavior. It crosses cultures, age groups, socioeconomic backgrounds, which means any finding apply broadly to the general population. So, this slide set up the motivation for the entire study. Coffee isn't just a beverage, it's a widely consumed pharmacological agent with the potential to influence health at a population scale. That makes it an ideal target for large observational studies like the UK Biobank. This slide outlines the study's design, which is extremely important because the strength of the evidence depends on the strength of the methodology. The UK Biobank is one of the world's most important biomedical data sets. It includes about 50,000 lakhs adults recruited between ages 40 and 69, with follow-up continuing for over a decade. What makes the data set particularly strong is that it integrates detailed diet questionnaires, biological samples, genetic information, medical records, imaging, mortality data from national registries. So, in this coffee study, the researchers divided participants into groups based on both the type of coffee and the amount consumed. This is a major improvement over earlier studies, which often treated coffee as a single homogeneous category. The outcomes were determined through clinical records, not self-report, which greatly reduces inaccuracies. Arrhythmias, cardiovascular diseases, which include CHD, heart failure, and stroke, and also causes mortality, were all tracked through verified diagnosis. Another important methodological strength is the adjustment for co-founders. The study controlled for age, sex, ethnicity, smoking status, BMI in waist circumference, physical activity, tea consumption, alcohol intake, socioeconomic factor. This makes the association more reliable, although not completely free from residual co-founding, which I'll discuss later. And now the sample size, long follow-up duration, and high quality outcome verification all make the study one of the most reliable sources of evidence on coffee consumption and heart health. This slide focuses on arrhythmiasis, one of the most surprising findings of the study. Tradition patients with arrhythmiasis have been told to avoid caffeine, but the UK Biobank data directly contradicts this long-held belief. The results show ground coffee drinkers had the strongest risk reduction, especially at 4 to 5 cups per day, which is less than 0.83. Instant coffee drinkers show moderate risk reduction around 2 to 3 cups per day, that is less than 0.88. Decaf coffee drinkers did not show major arrhythmias protection. This pattern implies that the protective effect may come from caffeine itself or from compounds more abundant in ground coffee. This makes sense physiologically. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, preventing excessive slowing of the heart, enhances calcium handling in cardiomyocytes, improve conduction through the AV node. This actually stabilizes electrical activity rather than destabilizing it. The protective effect follows a U-shaped curve, meaning moderate consumption is beneficial, but extremely high consumption doesn't add extra benefit. This is an important point. In nutrition epidemiology, U-shaped relationships are common, reflecting physiological saturation points. Furthermore, these findings align with several other large cohort studies from Denmark, Korea, and the US, all of which found neutral or protective effects of caffeine on arrhythmiasis. So, this slide provides strong evidence that the long-standing medical advice to provide coffee for arrhythmiasis may need updating. This slide expands the finding from arrhythmias to broader cardiovascular outcomes, which is the really heart of the study. The researchers found that all three types of coffee, which is ground, instant, and even decaf, were associated with reduced cardiovascular disease and reduced mortality. But the magnitude of effect varied by type. The strongest reduction in cardiovascular disease occurred around 2 to 3 cups per day. Stroke is HR 0.84, coronary heart disease HR 0.89, and heart failure is 0.83. Overall cardiovascular disease is 10% reduction. So from a population health perspective, these are meaningful protective effects, especially considering that cardiovascular disease remains the leading cause of death worldwide. The mortality results are perhaps even more striking. Ground coffee is less than 27% reduction in all-cause mortality. Instant coffee is 11% reduction. Decaf 14% reduction. And these differences likely reflect variations in chemical compositions. Ground coffee is richer in chlorogenic acid, cafestol, kavol, and antioxidants because instant coffee loses some of these compounds during processing. So it's important to critically evaluate these findings, like the dose response pattern in consistence, the association are biologically plausible, Results align with several meta-analyses, but as an observational study, casually cannot be definitely proven. And residual co-founding is always possible. Plus, coffee consumption might correlate with other lifestyle factors because the study control for many co-founders and because different types of coffee showed different magnitudes of benefits. So it strengthens the argument that coffee itself, not just lifestyle patterns, contributes to the outcomes. This slide demonstrates the importance of combining epidemiologically pattern with mechanistic insights. To fully understand the study's result, we need to examine the biological mechanism that connect to coffee consumption with cardiovascular health. And in this case, the mechanism are robust and well documented. The first is arrhythmiatic effects. As discussed earlier, caffeine blocks adenosine receptors and modulates calcium signaling, which stabilizes cardiac conduction. And the next is antioxidant and polyphenols. So, coffee is one of the richest dietary sources of antioxidants. Chlorogenic acid reduces oxidative stress, which is a key driver of endothelial dysfunction, vascular stiffness, and plaque formation. Next will be anti-inflammatory effects. Chronic low-grade inflammation contributes to atherosclerosis. Coffee's anti-inflammatory compounds, including polyphenols, diterpenes, and melanoidins, which reduces inflammatory cytokines and improve vascular tone. And then next comes with improved glucose and lipid metabolism. Coffee enhances insulin sensitivity and reduces glucose spikes. Better metabolic control leads to less vascular injury over time. And we'll go with micronutrients. So micronutrients in the coffee contains magnesium and potassium, both of which support endothelial function and blood pressure regulation. When we place all of this when we place all of these mechanisms together, we see a multi-layered protective effect. Coffee doesn't influence cardiovascular health through a single pathway. It acts through metabolic, inflammatory, oxidative, and electrophysiological mechanisms simultaneously. This is exactly the type of multi-system interaction that can lead to moderate but meaningful reductions in disease outcomes at the population level. And the biological plausibility here is extremely strong, which makes the epidemiological findings much more convincing. And the final slide brings everything together into a practical real world interpretation, which is important because research only matters if it influences behavior, guidelines, or public health. The main conclusion from this study is that moderate coffee consumption, about 2 to 3 cups per day, which is associated with better cardiovascular outcomes, not worse. This is true across coffee types, although ground coffee appears to offer the strongest protection. Clinically, this challenges the long-standing belief that patients with arrhythmias should avoid coffee. The evidence simply doesn't support the recommendation anymore. However, coffee must still be consumed responsibly. Avoid excess sugar, avoid calorie-heavy creamers, be mindful of anxiety or sleep disturbance, consider individual caffeine sensitivity. But for the average person, coffee is not only safe, it may actually contribute to lower long-term cardiovascular risk. From a scientific perspective, the UK Biobank study is a reminder that our assumption must always be tested with rigorous data. Coffee went from being considered potentially harmful to being recognized as potentially protective. Thank you so much for listening.